Check 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. I need somebody to go give me a mic check. Fine. Need somebody to go give me a mic check. All right. Need somebody to go give me a mic check. All right. Need somebody to go give me a mic check. Okay, I don't hear them on there. So on the on the Behringer box, I'm going to mute my microphone.
Test. 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending this hearing on Tuesday morning here. We'd like to get started off here with the pledge. So, Representative Rowe, would you mind leading us in the pledge?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, once again, good morning, everybody. My name is Torren Ecker. I am chairing the committee today on behalf of our chairman, Josh Kale. And we have a very interesting hearing today. But before we get into the details of the hearing, I'd like the members to introduce themselves. We will have some members appearing online up here. As always, members, if you're online and have a question, just raise your hand on there or send me or Dan a text. But they will be coming and going. It is a session day in Harrisburg, but we also felt important to have this hearing and keep this hearing on the books. So there will be people coming and going to get back and forth to Harrisburg. So without further ado, Representative Ledbetter.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Representative Robert Ledbetter, representing the 109th District, consisting of all of Columbia County.
Good morning, Representative Craig Williams from Delaware and Chester County. I'm southwest Delaware County in the Chadds Ford Concord area all the way out to Westtown.
John Lawrence, 13th District, Southern Chester County.
Good morning, I'm David Rowe. I have the privilege of representing the 85th Legislative District, and that is Union, Snyder, Juniata, and Mifflin counties.
Hi, I'm Representative Kristen Marcel from the 178th District in Central Bucks County, so in the southeast as well. Thank you.
And I believe we have Representative Jim Struzzi from Indiana County online with us as well. And like I said, there will be some members popping on and off, and I'll try to make sure I keep note of that and introduce them as they appear. Why are we here today? You guys know why we're here today. We're here to talk about John Lawrence and Representative Lawrence's advocacy for this community. And he has been a strong advocate for many community projects and legislation in Harrisburg. He's somebody that I think a lot of our colleagues look up to. And when John has an issue that he cares about, it's important that we care about his issues just like he cares about ours. So the reason we're here today is to hear local concerns about DCNR's plans to develop the big Elk Creek State Park. And while this is a very local issue, it still impacts our state budget as we go through that. It still impacts things that happen across the Commonwealth. So as you can see, we have members from all over the state here to hear testimony from our testifiers today and to get a better idea of what's going on with this project. We have 8 testifiers representing DCNR, local community leaders, and also local community members. We hope to learn a lot from these testifiers today and hopefully get a better grasp of what DCNR's plans are moving forward. And without further ado, I'd really like to turn this over to to Representative John Lawrence, who, again, we want to thank you for bringing us to your district. Thank you for bringing this important hearing. And John, it's all you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the members of the committee for making the drive to be here today. As mentioned by the chairman, today was scheduled as a session day after we'd already scheduled this policy hearing, so all of us will be headed directly to the Capitol after the hearing. I would like to take a moment to thank Avon Grove School District, in particular Superintendent Marchese, for hosting us today here in the auditorium of the new high school. And as mentioned, today's hearing focuses on future plans for the Big Elk Creek State Park. In my view, the decisions made in the next 12 months regarding Big Elk will impact southern Chester County for the next 100 years and beyond. And as one who grew up a few hundred yards from what is now the Big Elk Creek State Park, and one who appreciates the legacy that's been left to us by our predecessors, and thinking there of the White Clay Creek Preserve, Fair Hill Natural Resources areas, decades of conservation work in the surrounding areas, I appreciate the chairman for scheduling this hearing to help keep this issue front and center, and I appreciate all of the testifiers who have made their way here today as well. And we have a lot of testifiers, so let's get started. Thank you.
So we have a pretty aggressive schedule, and as we've alluded to, we do have to get back to session at some point today. So testifiers, I'd ask that you keep your remarks to about 3 to 5 minutes. Again, I'm not going to gavel anybody down, but to keep things moving, to keep the testifier commentary down a little bit, and then we'll field questions. There's 3 different panels today, and each panel will have questions from the members that are here today. Today we have, I guess, 9 testifiers now. They include representatives from the Department of Natural Resources, local officials, and residents. All will share their long-term interest for Big Elk Creek State Park. Again, to keep things moving, I won't gavel anybody down, but again, just if we can tighten up our questions or our testimony as quick as we can so we can get into questions and get into some of the details. So the first panel we have here today is DCNR, and we have John Hallis he's the State Parks Director for DCNR, and we also have Rob Campion, who is a park manager for the area. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. Good morning, public and partners that are present today. As noted, I'm John Hallis. I'm Director of State Parks. I've been a DCNR conservation professional and commissioned officer of the Commonwealth since 2000, and I'm joined today by Park Manager Robert Campion, that's headquartered at White Clay Creek Preserve and Big Elk Creek State Park. And first, this morning, I want to acknowledge and bring to the committee's attention 2 groups that work together, hand in hand, to provide service on our state parks and to the public. The first group is our state park professional staff. They are responsible for the corpus of the trust in the Commonwealth, our natural and cultural resources that they're entrusted to protect and conserve and take care of for the public's enjoyment. They are professionals, they are trained, they have expertise, and they do everything from providing emergency services and response to our visitors, as well as taking care of the resources firsthand, whether it's treating invasive species on land and water or planting trees to improve the resource. They're there day in, day out as our professional staff. But we couldn't do it alone, our professional staff. So the other group, I certainly would be remiss if I did not mention them today, is our conservation volunteers, our friends groups. They work hand in hand with our park staff to take care of the natural and cultural resources of the park, to steward them, carry them forward in perpetuity, and serve the public. And they do this selflessly, without compensation, except the service they provide, knowing that they're making a difference. And again, they're on our operational model, critical and vital to the protection of the resources in our parks. Our conservation volunteers are both knowledgeable and informed, and they're actively engaged in our conservation work in state parks. And I would encourage anyone that cares about their state parks to get involved in that way, become a conservation volunteer and member of a friends group to steward and take care of and ensure that all of our public natural resources in our state parks are being taken care of. I also note that because of that selfless service from our conservation volunteers, they deserve our respect and appreciation for their service. Now I'll get specifically to my prepared comments on Big Elk Creek State Park. The majority of land tracts in Big Elk Creek State Park were purchased from the Conservation Fund, which acted as an intermediary with the seller, George Strawbridge Jr. The first acquisition was completed in 2010 for 735 acres. The second acquisition was completed in 3 phases from 2018 through 2020 for 978 acres. Total cost for both acquisitions was $32.25 million and was accomplished through a series of grants from DCNR, Chester County, the Mount Cuba Center, local contributions, and Commonwealth capital funding. From the very beginning of this conservation work, the over 1,700 acres that comprise these protracted acquisitions were to be conveyed to and managed by DCNR's Bureau of State Parks, in alignment with DCNR's statutory authority in Act 18 of 1995, and are fully compatible with the conservation easements that run with the property through the acquisitions DCNR undertook. While we advanced and ultimately completed these acquisition projects that added to then Pennsylvania's system of 121 state parks, we did not simultaneously receive any operations, maintenance, and capital improvement resources in DCNR's budget for this new responsibility and administrative mandate. To state the obvious, it takes funding and professional staff to successfully and effectively manage our public lands. In fiscal year 2022 and 23 budget, Governor Wolf's administration and the General Assembly committed the funding and professional staff complement needed for Big Elk Creek in Chester County, and 2 additional new state parks, Vosburg Neck in Wyoming County and Susquehanna Riverlands in York County. This commitment marked a historic conservation legacy moment for the Commonwealth. With this commitment, the start of stewardship efforts for the natural resources of the park could begin, while DCNR also moved forward with necessary park planning. This new park master plan will ultimately provide the core standard elements needed for ensuring resource protection and ecological improvements, safe and sanitary public access and use, public safety, and enjoyment of healthful outdoor recreation opportunities, and for providing environmental education and park resource interpretation. This is the Bureau of State Parks' mission and mandate. Initial planning work began in the late spring of 2023 with initial stakeholder engagement and public survey work. While local and state jurisdictions were invited to these initial stakeholder engagements, we did not gain participation, involvement, or responses from all our invites and requests for participation. As it is said, hindsight is 20/20, and I believe if we would have had full participation and insisted on it and involvement in the summer of 2023's initial stakeholder engagement, DCNR would have benefited in our needed planning efforts, and the public would have been better served through clear expectations and understanding in how DCNR would steward the resources of the park for the benefit of all. A public presentation of the preliminary planning concepts was held in November 2023 and was met with strong local objections, most strongly criticizing preliminary concepts for camping experiences in the park. In a joint Franklin-Elk Township public meeting convened in January of 2024, the public provided comments to elected officials and DCNR, with many comments being completely opposed to any improvements and enhancements for the state park. Many comments and concerns conveyed by the public, which were opposed to primary preliminary concepts of the plan, were passionately, but some were inaccurately asserting that state park improvements and enhancements would do irreparable harm or degrade the important natural resources of the park. At that meeting, Secretary Dunn announced to the public that a campground would not be included in the master plan. Additionally, at the joint townships meeting, DCNR agreed to step back from the master planning work completed to date and form an advisory group. The purpose of the group is to provide input and help inform the necessary state park planning effort. We have representation in the advisory group called the Big Elk Creek Task Force from local, county, and state political jurisdictions, as well as local and statewide state park stakeholders. DCNR's steadfast commitments and over decade-long partnership efforts for acquiring the properties of Big Elk Creek State Park have conserved the land's natural and cultural resources for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. We are working to fulfill on that commitment to create a park whose resources are professionally stewarded in perpetuity and a park that is accessible and welcoming for all. That is all.
Thank you, Ms. Hallis. And with us today, or also joining us now, is Representative Donna Shuren. from Montgomery County, and Representative Shelby Labs from Bucks County. We will now turn to questions. Representative Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative Lawrence, for putting this hearing together. I think it's a great opportunity for us to ask our questions before we go back to Harrisburg and figure out what we might do legislatively about this problem. Mr. Hallis, I would like to turn your attention to an environmental assessment that was conducted or submitted March 29th of 2019. Do you recall that document?
If you're referring to the environmental assessments associated with the LWCF designations that we placed on the property, is that the?
You submitted an environmental assessment to the National Park Service,
yes,
Pacific West Region in Seattle, Washington, for the purpose of acquiring this land for the purchase price of $13 million. Do you recall this document?
I don't recall the specifics, but I recall the need for that document.
Recall the fact of submitting an environmental assessment to the federal government for the purpose of purchasing this property.
I don't recall it was for the purchase of the property. I recall it was for the placement of Land and Water Conservation Fund protections on the property that DCNR initiated.
So, putting your words into something that's more understandable for the public, you want to make use of federal funds to assist in purchasing the $13 million purchase price for the Strawbridge portion of the property that is now going to be the park. Is that correct?
I believe that's inaccurate. I believe that we used LWCF replacement land and placed that protection on the Strawbridge properties that DCNR paid for, not with LWCF funds, but as replacement land protection for that property.
And replacement land under federal law is preserved space that is to replace previously preserved space that's going to be repurposed for another reason. And in this instance, it was other state park lands or state lands that were going to allow oil and gas drilling, and as a consequence of that allowance, you needed a replacement land, and this was going to serve that purpose.
They were impacts and conversions of LWCF lands and primarily state forest lands in DCNR that occurred in the past during the Marcellus play that DCNR acknowledged as conversions and then used the Strawbridge property to place as replacement land in our acquisition to mitigate those conversions of state forest land for Marcellus gas drilling.
Mitigating conversion land is environmental assessment speak for we're going to use open space, virgin territory for a new commercial purpose, in this instance drilling for gas and oil, and the property here in Chester County was to be replacement land for those new purposes elsewhere in the Commonwealth. Is that correct?
It was replacement after the fact. These impacts by drilling, mostly well pads and pipeline infrastructure, occurred again in the late 2000s and early teens.
In submitting this request to the federal government by way of an environmental assessment, which is required under the National Environmental Policy Act for you to do an environmental assessment anytime there is significant government action. The department said the former old Spring Lawn Road, which runs through the replacement property, has been converted to a public trail along Big Elk Creek, maintained by Elk Township for hiking, biking, bird watching, and horseback riding. The rest of the replacement property is comprised of forest land, rolling hills, and agricultural fields. It is anticipated that the recreational activities permissible at the existing White Clay Creek Preserve's Big Elk Creek section, including hunting, hiking, fishing, and wildlife watching, will be allowed on the replacement property. Do you recall submitting that to the federal government?
Yes, and it's necessary that it's open to recreation.
In the section dealing with recreation that these conversions are being bundled, about recreation, you said these conversions are being bundled together for replacement by the replacement property because the replacement property, again, substituting for other state lands for which there would now be drilling, will provide passive recreation opportunities including hunting, hiking, fishing, and wildlife watching. Do you recall submitting that to the federal government in 2019?
Yes.
Thank you. In the section dealing with topic natural, subtopic wetlands and water courses, The department said again to the federal government in seeking its authorization to use Chester County as replacement property for drilling elsewhere in the state that the proposed action will not impact Big Elk Creek or its tributaries, given that no development is proposed for the replacement property. Do you recall submitting that to the federal government?
Yes.
Thank you. With regard to air quality, again, a component of an environmental assessment required to the federal government before you may undertake significant government action. You said, although the area in which the replacement property is located is rural, Chester County is within a non-attainment area for criteria air pollutants, meaning it does not meet the Clean Air Act standards established by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The proposed action is exempt from regional and project level air quality analyses under the National Environmental Policy Act, for which you had to submit this application, given that it does not involve development of the replacement property or construction of any infrastructure. Do you recall submitting that to the federal government?
Again, for the purposes of replacement land, I believe that was the information
In
provided.
2019, did you say to the federal government that you had no intention on does not involve in development of the replacement property or construction of any infrastructure in an effort to get this to be deemed replacement property for drilling elsewhere in the state?
I believe that's in the document.
Is it now untrue?
Again, it's not for drilling that was happening in the state. It was DCNR willingly stepping forward and calling out needed replacement land for conversions that occurred.
The question I asked you was whether or not you submitted a document to the federal government at the time that you were going to use our county as replacement property and told the federal government that you would not be involved in any development or construction of any infrastructure on this property.
I don't recall if that's precisely the language used in the document.
Now your memory is failing you about a document you submitted to the National Park Service only 5 years ago. How long have you been with the department? I think you said a quarter of a century?
Yes.
With regard to noise levels in the replacement property are assumed to be relatively low given the rural setting and lack of noise generating sources. Major roadways, railroads, developments, etc. do not exist in proximity to the replacement property. The proposed action is exempt from conducting a noise analysis under NEPA, which again is the National Environmental Policy Act, given that it does not involve development of the replacement property or construction of any infrastructure. There will be no increases in ambient noise levels as a result of the proposed action. The use of the replacement property to resolve LWCF conversions, again for replacing property elsewhere in the state, will not cause activities or development that will increase noise levels because it will not involve construction of infrastructure. Do you recall saying that to the federal government?
That was noted in the document, yes.
With regard to endangered species, DCNR's acquisition of the replacement property will preserve critical habitat and open space in an area that has been experiencing increased development. Although there are no known populations of threatened or endangered species on the replacement property, there are populations in close proximity, and it is possible that they exist within the replacement property. We've now since learned that there are 3 species that are so protected we can't even say them out loud. Acquisition of the replacement property will help with species conservation. It will also provide more recreational opportunities such as hunting, hiking, fishing, and wildlife watching for the surrounding population. Southeastern Pennsylvania, where I live, does not contain many public areas that allow hunting, to which I can attest. The replacement property will provide hunters and other people with recreation interests who live in the densely populated southeastern Pennsylvania region a closer and more convenient area to recreate. Do you recall submitting this statement to the federal government?
That was part of our documentation for LWCF designation.
So you remember it now. Where do you live?
I live in Cumberland County.
Not in Chester County.
That's correct.
Your office is in Harrisburg?
Yes.
My question is, with all of that backdrop, this document was submitted on March 29th, 2019. You said in your opening testimony that it was late last year when you proposed to this community that we're going to have a development now in what is currently pristine wild territory that I assume still involves a sanitation facility, I think what you called latrine services, a water treatment plant. Even if you take camping away, we still intend to build buildings on what now is pristine forested area that you advertised to the federal government, and using it as replacement property would go undeveloped. What changed?
Well, first off, it's not pristine wild area. It's a natural resource that deserves and needs our attention and improvement and enhancements, which we're doing. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, which you're stating.
Everybody, we're gonna let's let the testifier speak. Thank you.
The Land and Water Conservation Fund protections that we placed, DCNR placed specifically on those properties to mitigate conversions for gas drilling elsewhere that happened in the past, was done out of our own intentions to clear those conversions. And those protections that Land and Water Conservation Fund, the federal protections, convey to the property conform with park improvements and enhancements for outdoor recreation and protection of our natural resources. They are not in opposition to those protections that we placed on the property.
Was this your decision?
It was a department decision.
What person thought it was a good idea to take replacement property, replacing other pristine land for which there was going to be drilling with pristine land in Chester County? Who wanted to build a park?
Again, it was not pristine land. It was land that was under agricultural use.
You can take issue with my choice of vocabulary. I live here. You don't. What I want to know is whose idea was this?
To acquire the 1,600 acres that were the
I think
Strawbridge
you know what I'm
property.
asking. Whose idea was it to develop and build infrastructure on our county?
There are improvements, infrastructure, and
Whose
development.
idea was
all
it?
124
See, the great news about
state
not
parks
having a
in the
judge and
Commonwealth,
being an
sir.
elected
Without
official is I can ask
degradation
the
to the
question over and over and
resources
over
of the
again
park.
until you answer it. Whose idea was this?
It was the departments.
The department
and the
is an agency.
administrations.
That's not a person. Whose idea was it?
Whose idea was it?
Was it the governor? Who insists that we build on Chester County?
First off, the impression that we're building, again, to the degradation of the resource is inaccurate. And it was department leadership, the Secretary Dunn, as well as myself, and the Wolf administration that provided the resources necessary to improve and enhance the park.
So it was
providing
you,
safe public
Governor
access.
Wolf, and the Secretary. That's what you maintain are the people who decided how we're going to develop Chester County?
It's not developing Chester County. As you assert, it's improving the natural resources and public access to the park.
Yes, I understand. Wegmans thinks they improved my township also by paving over what was forested area too. Your sense of what is an improvement over where I live versus mine is very different. I'm originally from Alaska. I like trees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would like just one last point to make is that in our adjoining state park, White Lake Creek Preserve, the very types of public amenities and improvements that we're planning for Big Elk Creek State Park exist to serve the public and take care of the resource in White Lake Creek Preserve.
Which is nearby, which is why we don't need it here.
Thank you, Thank you, Representative Williams. We're going to move now to Representative Kristen Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Representative Lawrence for hosting this hearing today, and also to this beautiful facility. It's very impressive. Director Hollis, I have had some conversations with Secretary Dunn in the past year and a half about Tyler State Park, which is in my district. I've grew up in my district. I've enjoyed that state park for many years, and our community has. I would say after COVID, we had some substantial changes to the park in terms of safety issues, staffing issues. Two of my township police departments have been responding to calls in the park because the rangers simply can't handle it, or they aren't there because they just can't handle all of the hours. And so lately, just in the last few weeks, we have had big, almost like road signs, like big flashing signs saying no swimming, no alcohol, park closes at sunset, because people simply do not listen to the rules, the rangers. They only listen if the police come. It's out of control to the point where some of the people in my district don't want to go to the park anymore, simply because it is just uncomfortable. It's too crowded. We don't know how to handle it. We're still looking into these issues in my district, and we'll continue to. But it seems to me like there could be similar concerns. One of the staffing issues that I heard about when I asked about this during an appropriations hearing this year is that in the Southeast, some of the salaries, that they aren't paying enough, so we can't get enough people attracted to these positions. So I'm wondering if there are going to be similar staffing, safety, resource management issues for Big Elk Creek Park. Unfortunately, we're hearing a lot from DCNR, for my park, for other parks, like, hey, don't worry, like, this is going to be okay. Like, eventually we'll get more help. We'll be able to do a better job. But we also have been told, my law enforcement has been told, we'll call you if we need you. But if the state police are called, it takes them about an hour to get there. So if there is a safety concern or something that is larger than just a small issue, we have some massive concerns in our community. And so I am, wondering, it seems like there might be residents in this area who would be concerned to hear about what's happening in my park, that it might be happening locally here in Chester County. So my question for you is, if DCNR cannot control the park and patrol it and maintain it in Bucks County, if my Tyler State Park is having massive issues that can't be fixed, what assurance can you give the people in Chester County and in the audience today that the situation at Big Elk Creek State Park will be any different?
Thank you for your question. As you noted, I think state parks visitation before COVID was already rising. There was demand on our natural resources across the state, 121 state parks at that time. And certainly Tyler and the population densities that exist in Bucks County and the proximity to that population with the state park, COVID was a game changer for particularly those parks that were already seeing high visitation. In our system of state parks, we went up approximately 27% between 2019 and 2020. We gained over 10 million visits that pandemic year. And it put a tremendous duress and stress on our natural resources and our staff that were dealing with the issues and challenges of heavy visitation. Again, and it wasn't universal. We had visitation growth in our system of state parks across the board, but certainly certain parks received the brunt of that as far as impacts that were not good for both our neighbors as well as the resources and our park staff trying to manage those resources. I would say that, again, with the commitment for our 3 new state parks at the end of the Wolf administration, we received that sort of critical need for a state park, which is the staffing required. Now, you noted that there are challenges that are specific to the Southeast regarding hiring, paying a wage that a living wage for our professional staff so that they could live and work in proximity to the park that they're assigned to is a challenge. We have struggled with hiring predominantly with law enforcement staff in recent years, but not just them, with all maintenance and trades classifications as well as professional staff, education staff. But we are working with our human resources professionals in the department and in the Commonwealth.
So I appreciate, I've heard this before.
Okay.
And COVID was 4 years ago.
I know.
And so what are you doing? Like, I appreciate your working with HR. I've heard the same exact thing from Secretary Dunn, and I appreciate it. But people are very concerned, and I think they're looking for action and something that is actually going to make a difference in our communities. And so you can talk about the concerns. You know, when I'm in an appropriations meeting asking, like, what can we do? And people just say, oh, like, we're fine. You're not fine. So what are you doing to change so that we can have positive impacts for our community members that want to enjoy these parks, or for people that are worried about having a state park because you simply aren't managing them?
For the parks that have capacity problems, and they're not all across the board, but certainly Tyler's one of them, but there are others in the system that are having and continue to have capacity problems, again, starting before COVID.
But what are you doing to deal with it? 4 years.
We are actively working to hire the staff needed, because many of those parks have vacancies that are a challenge to fill. And we also augment the staff of those parks with adjacent or regional staff when necessary to deal with capacity issues and overuse. So that's primarily how we're managing right now. In addition to trying to disperse recreation to other state parks, it's not a Pennsylvania state park problem as far as use and demand on our public lands. It's a national problem. It's other state park systems, it's our National Park Service, and our national lands. And many of the things that you're addressing and concerned about, and there's significant concerns, are a global issue on our public lands as far as use and demand.
Well, I would share that I appreciate that our governor is focused on getting stuff done, but this is an area where we could really get something done for our communities and things that actually matter. And so instead of just looking at this in a very bureaucratic fashion and like, oh, we're fine, everything's fine, it would, in my opinion, there needs to be some type of action, because otherwise, people in my own community don't want to go to their state park, because in our case, a lot of people are from New Jersey because we're so close or coming over. And so, in my opinion, it's a safety issue. It is we are waiting, it's like a time bomb. Like, we're waiting for something significant to happen at Tyler State Park that is a problem because it's not being managed. And I don't have any more questions for you. This is just a statement. But I'm going to be reaching out to Secretary Dunn again because I've seen nothing changing. I'm very disappointed that you can't even manage the state parklands that you have in my area and that you have had for decades. And we need change. We need to get stuff done. This is not a partisan issue. This is doing what's right for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Marcel. Representative David Rowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Representative Lawrence, for having us here. Thank you, Director, for being here. As Chairman Ecker mentioned, we are in the throes of the budget cycle, which we are now at an official budget impasse as we've met our deadline. So numbers and budgets are kind of front of mind for everyone here. I read a report that DCNR has a maintenance backlog statewide of about $1 billion, and about $900 million of that is just basic infrastructure. Are those numbers right? Are those still consistent? Are they more? Are they less? Where's the backlog now?
We talk about deferred maintenance or backlog, but that $1 billion plus number is really the total for all of our projects, both new improvements as well as deferred maintenance.
So how many of those deferred maintenance projects, I mean, how deferred for how long, right? Are these projects that are a decade old, or is these just last year's things that we're getting caught up on?
It's our maintenance backlog specific to deferred maintenance and things that we've called out as needing to be improved or repaired or replaced is really, really diverse. So it's everything from a comfort station, a shower facility, to needing to dredge and impoundment and remove sediment that's impacting the recreation.
So I used to be a township supervisor, and we would have basically capital reinvestment accounts that if we knew, hey, this specific park apparatus has a life cycle of 20 years, we know that replacing it will probably cost X amount of dollars. So every year we have to put this much money into the account. So in 20 years when we need to replace it, we suddenly don't have a huge dollar backlog. Does DCNR do any sort of budgeting to that extent where you say, hey, we know that this park maintenance or this infrastructure piece will cost X amount of dollars? Because to me, having a $1 billion backlog seems pretty like, how do you overcome that, right? Like, what did you miss to get to the point where, was it lack of funding on the state side? Was it taking on too many new projects without the revenue to fill it? How do you get to the point of having a $1 billion backlog?
It's again not $1 billion in backlog. It's $1 billion of total project needs or wants, if you will, and the deferred maintenance really for DCNR, which is both parks and forest infrastructure, is approximately $500 million.
So this new project, the Big Elk Creek, as you said, will be about $12 million. But then what are going to be the lifetime costs of maintenance? So then what is the infrastructure reinvestment cost going to be for Big Elk Creek over the next 20 years?
Again, new systems typically have particularly if we're talking about a simple facility, and what we're talking about as far as core standards in our state parks for simple facilities, I'll use the example of a restroom, a vault toilet at a trailhead to provide, again, sanitary facilities for the public. We install that, and we expect that infrastructure to have a 25 to 30 year service life in our state park.
Because my concern is if, I've been a small business owner for, a decade and a half, and, we generally will not take on new liabilities and have new expenditures if we're already overextended to a certain degree to where our other existing assets are failing, or at a point where, if we have a bathroom at some other park that's not being maintained and we have no plan to be able to maintain it, but then we're also building new bathrooms that we also don't know if we're going to be able to maintain in 20 years because we're still going to have a $1 billion backlog. My question is, this $12 million in new infrastructure plus the capital reinvestment costs over the life cycle of this new build out, how is DCNR paying for that when they're already $1 billion in the hole?
So we have, and you talked about a plan. We have a project plan. We have a 3-year running project plan. It's continuous, and it's meant to address our deferred maintenance. Projects are put into queue. We're receiving funding, and we receive funding annually from the Keystone 93 Conservation Fund, which is, again, part of the real estate transfer tax, as well as the Environmental Stewardship Fund. I always refer to those two special funds as certainly our necessary, bread and butter project work in state parks to address that deferred maintenance. We also receive bonded money, capital projects that are typically managed by Department of General Services. That goes into it as well. I will note that in the last 2 years, to address that deferred maintenance that has been building, even as we've been doing projects, there hasn't been a year that we have not done projects to address deferred maintenance. We've received in the last 2 years additional infrastructure funding from the administration. We received ARPA funding initially, and we received, again, authorization to use our oil and gas lease fund to the tune of $112 million in the fiscal year that we're in right now to, again, make steps forward to address that deferred maintenance. We have our own authority and engineering and design construction team within DCNR that actively works on park and forest projects. But again, there are a lot of projects that need to get done. The funding for the improvements and enhancements at Big Elk Creek State Park are an additional funding that was authorized again during that 22-23 fiscal year.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I would just encourage you, as we are in this era where, inflation is crazy, utility costs are crazy, everything's going up, everybody's tightening their belts, to consider that all of those monies, whether it's federal ARPA monies or it's state monies, administrative monies, at the end of the day, that's all their money, right? It's all taxpayer money. So I would just encourage you to consider, as you take on new projects and new investments and new liabilities, to consider, making sure you're taking care of the ones that we already have. Thank you very much for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Representative Rowe. Representative Shuren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Many thanks to all those affiliated with the Avon Grove High School and the school administration for allowing us to host today. Having served on the Souderton School Board for 12 years, this is certainly an impressive campus. I'm from Western Montgomery County, and I'm a big advocate for open space, have bills that have been held up, haven't really gone anywhere this year. But nonetheless, looking to double down on the Open Space Acts to protect open space and certainly, get a handle on some of the development that is happening up in my region of the state. I've come to learn through my travels that many of the issues, some of them the most minor of details, can drive local residents crazy when they go unaddressed. And with that in mind, Director Hallis, Big Elk Creek State Park adjoins Fair Hill National Resources area in Maryland. As you know, Fair Hill charges admission and Pennsylvania state parks do not. Can you tell me if DCNR has plans to address individuals, especially with large horse trailers from out of state, coming to Big Elk Creek State Park and parking for free, and then riding down to Fair Hill to skip paying for it?
So there have been conversations with Fair Hill and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources specifically regarding this issue. And one of the things, and we were talking about this actually in our last task force meeting when we were doing a field tour to talk about, again, improvements in public access. And the plan and the conversation has been that we would not fully develop parking facilities, large parking facilities like they have in Fair Hill that charges for parking and access for that trailered, horse trailer and vehicle needs, which require a lot more parking infrastructure than we were planning for in Big Elk Creek State Park. So while there'll be trails open to equestrian in Big Elk Creek State Park in the future, there won't be the build out of facilities to accommodate all of those trailers that show up at Fair Hill, whenever there's good riding weather. I'm not saying that we shouldn't provide a limited number, but there will not be certainly the build out that Fair Hill has with their equestrian center. There'll be shared multi-use trails for them to come back and forth across the border, but we will not build it out as Fair Hill has, nor are we going to charge fee for entrance to the park, which is against our enabling legislation in DCNR.
So using that same logic, that would still apply if overnight accommodations become a reality at Big Elk? It seems that it would quickly become the place to stay overnight when coming to an event at Fair Hill.
I can't project what the future would hold regarding would it be the Fair Hill camping crowd, but as I stated earlier, Secretary Dunn removed at our public meeting in January, removed the option of building a public campground at Big Elk Creek State Park and putting those plans into our master plan.
For now. So as you hear, I would strongly urge those discussions and possibilities to continue with Maryland.
We will.
Thank you, Representative Shuren. Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Hollis, for being here today. And I do, and it might be a small thing, but I do think it's fair to correct the record. Secretary Dunn did not say that the campground was off the table. She said it was off the table for now. And that's a difference. I realize time is short, and I have a number of questions I want to get through, so I'll try to be brief in my remarks. Some at the Chester County Planning Commission have discussed the possibility of Big Elk Creek, the White Clay Creek Preserve, the White Clay Park in Delaware, and Fair Hill Natural Resources Area as being a candidate for national park designation from the federal government. Are you aware of any conversations proposing such a move?
I'm not, Representative Lawrence.
What would be the position of DCNR on moving in that direction towards designating those properties as a national park?
I'll just say on the history of Commonwealth property becoming national parks, it was our predecessor agency in the Bureau of State Parks that gifted 2 state parks of the nation in 1976, the bicentennial year, our historic parks, Valley Forge and Independence. So there is precedent for state park land in the Commonwealth to become designated national park land and managed by the Park Service. But as far as my position, I don't have a position on that at this time.
So I have to say that doesn't give me a lot of comfort. It would be, I think, a step in the right direction for DCNR to take that off the table.
To take what off the table, sir?
Redesignating the Big Elk and White Clay Creek Preserve, any possibility of that being redesignated as a national park. Let me ask this question. I hand-delivered a petition with nearly 1,000 signatures on it to the governor's office, signed by a number of folks in the community, but also folks, frankly, from far and wide, asking the governor to make the decision to manage Big Elk Creek State Park as a preserve. Can you tell me what the governor's position is on this issue? Because I've had difficulty getting much of a response to that petition.
Representative Lawrence, I do not know what the governor's position is specifically on that designation. But as you know, as we've gone through task force meetings, White Clay Creek Preserve is a preserve by and managed as a preserve by policy and by state park designation. And as what we're proposing to advance for improvements and enhancements at Big Elk Creek State Park have similar attributes and elements that exist at White Clay Creek Preserve.
In January of 2019, DCNR recorded the purchase of the Strawbridge parcels in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, which is the official publication of the Commonwealth. And in that, DCNR stated, this property will provide passive recreation such as hiking, hunting, and wildlife watching. The property will be maintained by the Department's Bureau of State Parks. No recreational facilities are proposed to be developed at this time. I'm not aware that anything has been submitted to the Pennsylvania Bulletin that's changed that. That's the last thing I see on the record for this property in Pennsylvania's official document of record. Is there anything planned to be submitted to the Pennsylvania Bulletin on this matter?
Are there plans to submit additional documentation to the bulletin regarding the designation or the...
Regarding everything we've been talking about for the last year and a half as it pertains to the Big Elk Creek State Park?
We do for other issues and changes in management and other things of note. We do post in the bulletin. I can think of recently just changes in hunting designations in Southeast State Parks. A few years ago, we were making postings in the bulletin. So I would anticipate we would be posting additional information in the PA bulletin regarding Big Elk Creek State Park in the future.
But what concerns me is that is document of record has not been updated to reflect any of the proposed changes that DCNR has proposed for the park or has already commenced in the park, and I think that's very concerning. Let me ask this. In March of 2020, DCNR said, this is DCNR, not me. DCNR said the Strawbridge parcel will remain largely undeveloped, and it will always remain a place designated for low-impact recreation. The main attraction is the low-impact recreational component itself. The quietness that a non-developed park brings has benefits for those wishing to explore nature without the development typically associated with a day use or overnight park. Those were DCNR's words. Now, 2 years later and 5 months before the creation of the Big Elk Creek State Park was announced to the public, you sent an email to John Norbick, who's Deputy Secretary for Parks and Forestry at DCNR, outlining a $12 million development plan that was then part of the White Clay Creek Preserve. Now, something changed between March of 2020 and May of 2022. In that time frame, something changed. And it seems from Representative Williams' line of questions, that change was ordered by Secretary Dunn, you, and Governor Wolf. Is that correct?
So for the record on the comments that you're referring to, the information provided to the media regarding the acquisition, the last acquisition, that was our land management specialist that provided that, and I believe at the end of that it was for the foreseeable future. As I noted in my opening comments, we lacked the resources for a new mandate in 2020 when that final acquisition was made. What changed, and certainly this was noted earlier, is the demand for public recreation and access to our public lands. Some of them to the point of being overuse. One of the things that we're working to improve on is not just adding the staff and the resources to take care of those resources, but dispersing and providing additional opportunities. And Big Elk Creek is certainly in that realm of being that additional opportunity for outdoor recreation for a public that demands access to its public lands.
Do you see how, to me and to many who are in this room today, it appears that there was a giant bait and switch, and that subsequently, and that as a result, I'll just ask that first. Can you see how it would seem to many folks that there was a giant bait and switch?
Representative Lawrence, after having conversations with you, I understand that there were expectations from you as well as the local community that had a thought of what was going to be there or not be there, and that this was again the improvements to the park, the establishment of the park itself was in opposed to those expectations.
Right. What's frustrating to me is that it is not a thought I had. It is what DCNR said on the record. And nobody at the time said anything else. So there wasn't a statement from DCNR in 2019 or 2020 that said, down the road, we're thinking about X, Y, and Z here. And boy, look at the opportunity. It reminds me a little bit of a situation where somebody inherits grandma's $1 million, right? And grandma, before grandma dies, grandma, we're gonna give it to the poor, right? And we're gonna do all these great things, right? And then once she's gone, right, it's a different story, right? That's what this strikes me as, just to be candid with you. And it makes this perception of a bait and switch, which I think is more than just a perception, makes it difficult to believe anything that's coming from DCNR. What I would say is this, and what I find, to be candid, John, what I find unacceptable, after tremendous public outcry, feedback, and again, feedback, which is, it's not asking for something outlandish, it's that no one ever contemplated, it's simply contemplating what DCNR said they would do. It's difficult for me to understand that DCNR will not relent. You had suggested to me that this project came about was one of the factors, if not the factor, was that this is a legacy project for Governor Wolf. That decision seems to have been made. What I would say is this park has nothing to do with Governor Wolf. It has nothing to do. The acquisition of these properties began long before he was governor. It just happened to finish while he was on the watch. And this is not about Governor Wolf. It's not about anything. He can have a legacy project in York County at Mount Wolf. What I'm saying is this. This property is about the legacy. Frankly, if it's going to be about the legacy of anybody, it ought to be about the legacy of George Strawbridge. And Strawbridge, DCNR, Chester County, me, we're going to hear from Senator Dinniman if we ever get a chance to get to it here. Everyone involved in this project for 15 years put all their efforts towards securing this for one overarching goal, and that was to connect White Clay Creek Preserve and the associated White Clay Creek Park in Delaware which we could talk about for a long time, how Delaware has managed and stewarded that resource outside of the Carpenter State Park, which was already there, and the Louvieres, now Deerfield Golf Course, which again was already there. The rest of that property has been stewarded very much like the White Clay Creek Preserve. And we've already talked about Fair Hill, which, except for a large amount of, much of it prior existing, some of it not, but much of it prior existing for the equine community, much of that is managed very much like we would consider a preserve. The entire point of this was to connect those properties into one giant wilderness preserve. I'm begging you, I'm not below getting down on my hands and knees. DCNR has to drop this wolf legacy business and live up to the commitment they publicly made to everybody involved for over a decade.
Thank you, Representative Lawrence, and thank you. We're going to end on that, but just a quick comment here to keep things moving. You know, I live in an area with a lot of state parks, a lot of state forests, and something that I hear constantly from my folks is a lack of resources. And if I took away something today, it's why are we building out new infrastructure? Why are we adding to something if we can't take care of the parks that we have and the forests we have now? So I think that's a huge takeaway. I know I've had conversations with Secretary Dunn about that personally. So that's a huge concern, and I think before we're developing new state parks and new state land, we need to take care of the stuff we have already. So, Mr. House, I appreciate your testimony. Thank you for being here, and we're going to move to the next panel.
Thank you.
Let's get some water.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Just for the benefit of the audience, session begins in 20 minutes. So my colleagues here a couple of them have legislation that's running today. So they need to be up there. But we're going to continue with the hearing, and we'll make sure that everyone gets their due time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, and we're going to get started here. Again, we ran a little long there, but I think that was necessary. But we definitely want to hear from our community leaders as well. So, again, if you keep your testimony to 3 to 5 minutes, then we'll take some questions from you folks. So this panel here is the Honorable Senator Andrew Dinniman. He's retired from the 19th Senatorial District. We also have the Honorable David Gerstenhaber, probably butchered that, but my apologies, Chairman of the Franklin Township Board of Supervisors. We have also the Honorable Estes Walters. He's the Vice Chairman of Elk Township Board of Supervisors. And our good friend, the Honorable Eric Rowe, County Commissioner here in Chester County. So, Senator Dinniman, floor is yours.
Where's my, oh, here we go. Am I on? Good. I'm here today to clearly say as a Democrat that open space and plan managed growth is a bipartisan issue in this county and has been for the last 30 years. As county commissioner back in 1992, we created this program, and it's my responsibility, even if I'm in retirement, to make sure that it's maintained and that the open spaces and historic places of this county remain in perpetuity. Also, let me say I'm here today because commitments were made to Representative Lawrence and myself back in 2018, and I'll show the documentation of these commitments that were not kept by DCNR. And the commitment was, in essence, that the land in question, the Big Elk Creek Park, would be connected and part of the White Clay Creek Preserve. There was never a mention of some kind of traditional state park. It was clearly to us as state officials, to the county, and to the citizens of this area, that it was to be a preserve, and it was to be connected to the White Clay Creek Preserve. Now understand, what is a preserve? You have to go back to the county's open space plan. There were 4 types of open space. The first was agricultural, and we have saved a great deal of land. The second is parks on both the county and local levels. In fact, if DCNR wants a park, let them give some more money to Nottingham Park, which is adjacent to this preserve. If the DCNR wants a park, let them go up 15 minutes from here to Springton Manor, which is a county park. Both very large parks that take care of the park needs, and our townships have also, with county support, over these last 30 years, provided a whole network of parks. The third type of open space was to provide for the water resources of this county. And the fourth type of open space were to be preserves, were to be areas that would be preserved in their natural state and which would have limited human impact. Now, in terms of the county, the most famous or well-known preserve is the Lenfest Preserve, which operates as a model for what we would like to see happen. When the White Clay Creek and land given by the DuPonts was approved by the legislature in 1984, it was clear that this was to be a preserve. In fact, when it was handed over to the state office or Bureau of Forestry, it was very clear. It was the only preserve, actually, that was in the state park system. And in fact, White Clay Creek also has a federal designation as a scenic river byway. So what happened here? Well, it seemed that there were commitments made that were not actually kept. And let me, with the permission of the chair, just refer to a couple of these, and I'll submit them certainly to the House. And let me just get these out here. First, reading from the White Clay Creek Preserve, because, see, DCNR came to John and I, and they said, we need $2 million more for the Strawbridge property. And by the way, George Strawbridge was a great and most important environmentalist in this county. He's still alive, and if he was here today, he'd say, keep it as a preserve. I know that. I know George. We were friends. What was said if you look at the history of the White Clay Preserve, was this: because of the extremely sensitive natural balance in the area, and they go on and on. What was to be White Clay Creek State Park became White Clay Creek Preserve, the first preserve in the Bureau of State Parks by act of the legislature on June 26, 1984. Now, what did they tell us at the time? Well, the first thing I did was to ask DCNR to give me a report. So I'm going to read to you just a statement here from what's called the Strawbridge file, which is DCR was written by their consultant or their chief in this area. And it says here, once completed, the property in its entirety will be transferred to the Commonwealth as an addition, the word as an addition, to White Clay Creek Preserve. It was clear. So then I went to the trust, to what's called the Conservation Fund, and said, well, come on, what's your position? Blaine Phillips, who came to see John and I at the time, wrote back to me. It is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to protect a large part of Chester County, and I truly appreciate your help in getting it across the finish line. It was clear to me that it was to be a preserve. Their conservation fund said it was to be a preserve. DCNR said it was to be a preserve. And what about, and so before I met and went further, I wanted to know what the White Clay by-state preserve management plan was. So I went, and this is what they wrote. This is what I got at the time. Access to the preserve should be provided to the public for purposes of education, scientific investigation, and low-impact recreation at levels consistent with the protection of its natural, historic, and cultural resources. Then they go on to say, the preserve should be managed in such a manner as to provide users with as close to a wilderness experience as it is feasible to attain. Man, think about this, because I want you to understand the history of this, because there is a history. The history was, and that's one reason I'm here today, as I said, to proclaim open space, to protect open space in perpetuity, was we asked the question before John and I went to the state to ask them for more money. And the question was a simple one, and the answer was quite clear. It was to be added to the White Creek Preserve, and we would create the largest area of open space between Washington, D.C. and New York, and that was a noble cause that Representative Lawrence and I committed ourselves to, the county committed ourselves to. Then everything was quiet for about 4 years, wasn't it? Then all of a sudden in 2022, the bureaucracy declared that this was to be a state park. Now, they found out that the citizens here and the people in Chester County just don't accept, we'll fight back. We have, and we'll continue to fight back. Amen. They discovered, they walk into a room and 500 people there are saying, that's not what you said, man. That's not what you said. And that is correct. Because at the time they didn't say it to us. 4 years later, they're talking to a different tone. Finally, my final comment is this. Why should you as a legislature be concerned with this? After all, isn't this a local issue? You should be concerned about this because this brings up a fundamental problem with what I found in Harrisburg during my 4 terms as state senator. That is, the question is, who runs this Commonwealth? Is it the bureaucracy or is it the legislature? And I remember putting in a bill, and I was the author of the bill. It went through, and then I was told that that bill was not the intent of the legislature by the bureaucracy. It was my bill, but I was told it wasn't my intent. What has happened in this country is that the bureaucracy has replaced our elected officials, and the legislature needs to be concerned about this issue. Not just because it's a matter of open space and historic preservation, and it will be the largest piece of open space between Washington and New York, but it has to be concerned about this issue because it's a case of the people versus the bureaucracy in my judgment. And finally, my final comment is this, and it'll be brief, is this. We know that if we remain strong, that we will be doing something of utmost importance. This piece of land will be preserved in perpetuity. And in 1992, we said that we would have 1/3 of Chester County as open space in perpetuity. As commissioners, as Eric will tell you, we're 30% there. And we're not going to let any land be taken away from us. This needs to be continued as our example of open space that has limited human impact. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify, and thank you in the audience for your willingness to stand up to a bureaucracy which thinks it knows better than the people of this county. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Supervisor.
So I really have to follow Andy Dinneman? Is that that's what's happening here? So my name is David Gerstenhaber, and I'm the chairman of the board for supervisors of Franklin Township. So I have a couple of concerns that I'm going to raise regarding the development of Big Elk Creek State Park. And they're going to highlight some issues that the Department of Conservation and National Resources, DCNR, has had interacting with local municipalities and residents. Some of these are going to sound a bit mundane and perhaps pedantic, but they're really fundamental in any kind of project when you have multiple large organizations like municipalities and state organizations trying to work together. So let me start with some background. Big Elk Creek State Park, formerly known as Big Elk Creek Preserve, formerly known as the Strawbridge property, became part of DCNR's park system with financial support from the Conservation Fund, Chester County, and Mount Cuba Center. At the time the deal was completed, Blaine Phillips, Mid-Atlantic Regional Director for the Conservation Fund, was quoted in a March 2020 Penn Live article, and I'll quote, "Large tracts of open space like this are extremely rare and valuable, especially in such highly developed and populated areas. This is an opportunity to maintain a bucolic landscape that is quickly vanishing." From the same article, Ann Rose, the president of the Mount Cuba Center, added, "As pressure from development, climate change, and other threats pose unprecedented risks for biodiversity, one of the most important things we can do to support flora and fauna is to conserve open space and the habitats it comprises. The Strawbridge property extends an important wildlife corridor and provides a refuge for a wide array of rare and threatened species." And at the time, Mike Redding from the DCNR seemed to agree with the conservation groups. And this is a bit of a long quote, but I think it illustrates DCNR's stated intentions at the time when they received their funding. "The park will always remain a place designated for low-impact recreation. We plan to work with local partners to develop a plan for the land and how it fits into the landscape and adjoining open space in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. The benefits of protecting these historic lands are multifaceted. For those who will enjoy the park, they will be treated to passive, low-impact types of recreational activities. For those who don't use the park directly, the benefits are clean air and clean water that these amazing open spaces provide. There's also the benefit to the wildlife and plant species that call this area home. The main attraction is the low-impact recreational component itself. The quietness that a non-developed park brings has benefits for those wishing to explore nature without the development typically associated with a day use or overnight park." So this messaging from 2020 sets the stage for what the regional expectations were. Why conservation groups supported DCNR in their purchase of the property, why Mr. Strawbridge supported the sale, and why our local residents were shocked and angry when DCNR, roughly 3 years later, announced their plan for the development of Big Elk Creek State Park into a full-service overnight park. This plan included, at the time, the construction of several buildings, septic fields, an amphitheater, full-service RV hookups, and other overnight accommodations. Not to mention that they are currently implementing the destruction of the meadows via tree planting effort and large-scale glycophosphate treatment. These meadows were home to the very nesting migratory birds, rare and endangered flowers, and insects that they were setting out to protect back in 2020. So it's understandable why we're all here talking about this, that something has changed. So that being said, I think I've set the stage, and let's talk about why I'm here and my immediate concerns regarding DCNR's behavior. At issue with Franklin Township, and I think Elk, beyond DCNR's apparent 180 regarding land preservation and their lack of transparency with our residents, focuses on their bewildering reluctance to work with our townships on very practical issues as they pursue this scheme. A recent example is DCNR's undertaking a tree planting exercise during which they, without notification, accessed the Big Elk Creek State Park property via Franklin Township's Mount Olivet pedestrian trail. So why is this an issue? First, heavy equipment being operated on local paths where pedestrians are not expecting or looking for any motorized vehicles due to their prohibition produces a significant and critical safety risk. Further, access required DCNR's equipment to use what we consider a pedestrian bridge. Franklin Township's Mount Olivet Bridge is, for the lack of a better phrase, decommissioned as a motor vehicle bridge. What that means is we're no longer inspecting it or maintaining it for motor vehicle use. So, do we want to stop DCNR from accessing their property? Of course not. But we wanted to address these issues. So we asked DCNR to provide dates for work, as well as vehicle types and weights, so we could ensure the integrity of our bridge and trail and alert our residents to make sure that safety could be maintained. The response from DCNR was stark. Initially, was, "We do not need your permission to access our property." We are also concerned with impacts on our infrastructure and the safety of our visitors and residents. Local zoning and building codes exist to ensure that the development occurs in a safe and rational way. Typical questions around the submission of building plans, the number of visitors and vehicles they expect, overnight security at the park if needed, and traffic impact have been answered with abstinence or uncertainty. Granted, most of these plans are not in place yet, so they don't have those answers. But I think it's telling that the statement regarding how and if DCNR will address municipal concerns regarding building codes and zoning comes from an April 1st, 2024 letter to Representative Lawrence, where DCNR flatly states it is not subject to local zoning ordinances and land use regulations. They're essentially folding their arms. So in summary, these stark and combative statements are unnecessary and are at odds with an organization that is presumably operating in good faith. It's essential for DCNR to consider and implement the perspectives and needs of its residents, as well as ensuring that their actions align with the community's safety and environmental conservation goals. So what am I asking for? I'm asking for a clear and open communication and transparency with local municipalities in adherence to established regulations and their own environmental guidance on the property. This will be key to resolving these ongoing issues and allow us to move forward in a manner that benefits everybody. And so with that, I conclude my comments. Thank you all for your time.
Mr. Walters?
Okay. Put some glasses on. I'm getting old. Thank you, members of the committee, for an opportunity to speak today. My name is Estes Walters. I'm the Vice Chairman and Roadmaster for Elk Township, Chester County, Pennsylvania. The Big Elk State Park is located in part in Elk Township. I speak to you today both as a lifetime resident of Elk Township and as a supervisor responsible for the government of the township. My family moved to Elk Township in 1927 and purchased our farm that has remained in our family for 3 generations. As do all farm kids, one of our chores was assigned to pick up the rocks. Farm children grow up all across this area, therefore spent a lot of time during plowing season bending over and throwing rocks into the beds of loaders, trucks, wagons to smooth the surface area. In Elk Township, however, it wasn't just rocks that we picked. Elk Township and the Big Elk Creek were areas where Native Americans both lived and hunted. Thus, along with the rocks in the fields, Elk Township were many arrowheads found. My experience was not unusual, and I think you will find that many farmers have memories of arrowheads plowed up on their farm fields. Farm fields are the only location, weren't only the only location for artifacts from Native Americans. We once found a tomahawk in our front yard while installing our mailbox. This pristine area, which has been farmed and preserved since the time that the Native Americans walked and hunted here, should be kept in a pristine condition in honor of the Native Americans population who lived here before our time. I have been a supervisor in Elk Township for over 20 years. My father was a supervisor before me. He was a farmer with an eye on keeping the land open. When he was a supervisor, he told me, and I was like 14 years old at the time, that development's coming our way, and that it's important for Elk Township to enact a zoning ordinance to regulate growth in a reasonable and safe way, or we'll have our metropolis from Philadelphia to Baltimore. Elk Township is a farming community with some reasonable residential growth because of the careful zoning regulations that have been put in place for decades. Because of that, Elk Township remains rural with a very low population. Early in this century, the voters of Elk Township decided by referendum to increase the earned income tax on themselves in order to preserve open space. Our taxpayers, limited though they are in number, obligated themselves to pay more taxes so that we could preserve open space. That program, in combination with funds from the county, has been a huge success that Elk Township is now 57% open space. That is forever restricted against development. The township has spent nearly $1.7 million taxpayer dollars to preserve those acres. When I heard about the acquisition of the Strawbridge property, now captioned Big Elk Creek State Park, I was excited. I thought that all this land would continue in its natural state and added to the open space available in the township. I am dismayed by the plan by DCNR to place cabins and areas for RVs on this beautifully preserved land that was the past of the Native Americans that turned into a campground, more appropriately located in a developed area. This action by DCNR is contrary to what the citizens of Elk Township, its board of supervisors, have done to keep our lands in their natural state. Elk Township has 1,700 residents. Those few residents voted to tax themselves to keep this land open. They did not vote upon this plan to turn it into a natural preserve, into a high-volume, high-population campground that is much like commercial campgrounds run by non-state agencies. This plan is contrary to the wishes of the residents. There are only 1,700 of us. We are a tight-knit farm community, and we're used to our value, our peace and quiet. Many of our farmers are from the Amish community. If you are not familiar with the Amish community, those individuals use horse and buggies for transport on public roads and use horses and mules to pull farm implements. They are based on hundreds of years of quiet farming. Those of us who live in the area know how to look out for our Amish on our roads. We know how to wait for a safe place to pass them, and if we're in a hurry, we know how to wait to allow them to take their actions they need to safely access and turn off our roads. I would submit to you that the tourists and campers who come here from out of the area and more urban areas are likely to become a serious risk to our Amish brethren. Our township has a lot of hills, roads, and a lot of curves, and the additional traffic on our roads are going to put us all at risk, but especially the Amish community. I mentioned the 1,700 residents in Elk Township. The low population results in a very low budget. Our annual budget is around $430,000 a year. 27% of those funds are used to pay fire, ambulance, and medical services, Medic 94 services. The calculation of our responsibility for our share of the local fire company and ambulance and Medic 94 services is based on a number of calls, among other things. We have only 1,700 residents, and according to the calls are received in Elk Township are few compared to other higher population districts. If this camp is placed there with multiple tourists staying overnight in tents, cabins, RVs, there's no question that the number of calls in Elk Township will increase. Elk Township does not have the funds to pay for additional people or additional calls for people who are camping but are not Elk Township residents. If DCNR looks carefully in an aerial view of the Big Elk State Park, they will note that it is very close to the Maryland and Delaware border. The Big Elk Creek State Park is closer to the population centers in Delaware and Maryland than it is in the center of Pennsylvania. Thus, while DCNR states that their purpose is to provide campgrounds for Pennsylvania residents, in fact, a campground at this location will provide campsites for Delaware residents and Maryland residents and a greater number than Pennsylvania residents. Being a supervisor, I'm familiar with our zoning ordinance. The Elk Township zoning ordinance classifies the area in which Big Elk Creek State Park is located in the R2 agricultural district, residential district, excuse me. One of the stated purposes of Section 200 of the ordinance for this district is to support the preservation of sensitive environmental features such as streams, floods, plains, wetlands, and areas and steep slopes. The ordinance identifies uses permitted in this district, such as woodland preserve, game farm and preserve, wildlife sanctuary, or other conservation purpose in accordance with the provisions of Section 1233. Section 1233 provides that no building shall be permitted anywhere on the premises with the exception of one maintenance shed with a maximum floor area of 400 square feet. Clearly, this plan proposed by the DCNR to place tents, cabins, RVs, a visitor center, and other camping facilities on this land violates the Elk Township zoning ordinance because this use is not permitted. DCNR has stated that it doesn't matter. They don't have to follow our zoning. Thus, we have state agency for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania deciding that the legislative action of the Elk Township Board of Supervisors to carefully and methodically make a determination as to how the land in the township be used is of no moment. DCNR is saying we are a state agency and we can do what we want in your township with regard to negative impact on the citizens who live here. I would submit this to the committee and to the DCNR that is wrong, that the local residents should have a say in what happens here. The zoning ordinance gives local residents a say in what is used and is permitted in our area. DCNR now comes into our township without any regard to the well-being of our residents who live here and the financial consequences to the residents who live here with a desire to the pristine preserve into a commercial campground. I would urge them to reconsider. In conclusion, the township appreciates that DCNR has planted some trees on the property, some off-road parking, and a few trails are appropriate for use of this park. Elk Township has an easement for the Spring Lawn Trail, which goes through our park. This has been in effect for over 15 years and a wonderful place for folks to walk. It's already in existence as a sufficient way for people to use the remaining lands without interfering its natural state. The proposed commercial campground is not appropriate for Big Elk Creek State Park. Thank you.
Thanks, Supervisor Walters. Commissioner Rowe.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Ecker, Representative Lawrence, distinguished committee members, and members of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for the opportunity to submit my oral and written testimony today regarding Big Elk Creek State Park. I'm County Commissioner Eric Rowe. Thank you for having me. By way of background, I had the privilege of serving in the Pennsylvania General Assembly as a state representative for the 158th Legislative District from 2016 to 2018. My district at that time covered most of Landenberg, Pennsylvania, including London Britton Township and New Garden Township. It was during those 2 years that I fell in love with southern Chester County, its landscapes, and its natural beauty. While other areas of my district were falling victim to overdevelopment and urban sprawl, the southernmost parts of my territory remained mostly undeveloped, much of it placed under conservation easement. In 2023, I was elected County Commissioner, where I have the privilege of governing one of the 3 original counties formed by William Penn way back in 1682. In this new role, it is my responsibility to protect Chester County's natural resources and preserve them for the benefit of current and future generations. Chester County's quality of place depends on my taking that responsibility seriously, which I certainly do. If you've ever traveled across the country, you may have noticed that most suburban counties look a lot alike. Large, cookie-cutter homes that are close together, near big box stores and run-of-the-mill brand-name shopping with plenty of multi-lane highways and wide sidewalks to connect all of the towns. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. But Chester County is different. Despite its proximity to Philadelphia and Wilmington, and despite its rapid growth over the past 2 decades, Chester County has maintained much of the rural charm that it has enjoyed for centuries. The main reason it has maintained its unique qualities is due to its preserved open spaces. When I say that we take open space seriously in Chester County, I mean it. In fact, we have preserved so much of it that the sum of our open spaces exceeds the land areas of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh combined. We like it that way. It's made our county very attractive for people looking to move here, as well as people looking for recreational opportunities here. It's no secret that Chester County is an attractive place to live and visit, but with that high quality comes great responsibility to protect our greatest assets, and that includes Big Elk Creek State Park. Today, I'll discuss our county government's relationship with Big Elk Creek State Park, what this state park means to thousands of Chester County residents, and how it fits into Chester County's plans. While I cannot speak on behalf of the other members of the Chester County Board of Commissioners, I'm happy to speak on my own behalf and offer my insights. Chester County's relationship with Big Elk Creek State Park is rooted in its open space preservation grants. Chester County's invested millions of dollars through its Preservation Partnership Program to preserve Big Elk Creek State Park. The 3 most notable investments in these lands took place in 2007, 2016, and 2022. In 2007, Chester County invested $3,005,250 into the preservation of over 747 acres of land known as Strawbridge South. The county county declaration for this grant was recorded on December 23, 2009. In 2016, Chester County invested $5 million into the preservation of over 978 acres of land known as Strawbridge North. County declarations for this grant were recorded on November 3, 2017, October 26, 2018, and February 6, 2020. And in 2022, Chester County invested $324,771.88 into the preservation of over 166 acres of land known as the Martin 6 property. In total, Chester County has spent over $8 $8,330,021 to preserve the land in Big Elk Creek State Park as open space. With an investment of over $8 million, Chester County has a significant interest in how this park is used and maintained, and we should have a say. When counties give out grants for open space preservation, a declaration is issued which outlines what the land may be used for, what it may not be used for, and what must happen if improvements or changes are made to the property. Some examples include a requirement that the owner of the property, so the Commonwealth, shall notify Chester County in writing no fewer than 60 days prior to undertaking any activities that would reasonably be expected to materially alter the property. Such activities could include the construction of public access improvements or vegetation management activities that would significantly affect any portion of the property. The notice shall describe the nature, scope, design, location, timetable, and any other aspect of proposed activity in sufficient detail to enable the county to make informed judgments as to its consistency with the open space purposes of such a declaration. Another stipulation includes a requirement that the owner shall notify Chester County in writing at least 30 days prior to the transfer of any interest in the property. And another stipulation includes a requirement that the land shall be restricted to open space, agricultural, forestal, park, recreation, natural resource conservation, or public access purposes, including but not limited to such purposes and uses authorized for state parkland pursuant to the Conservation and Natural Resources Act. In 2018, the County Commissioners adopted the county's latest comprehensive plan known as Landscapes 3. Landscapes 3 essentially answers this question: what do we want Chester County to look like 10 years from now? The plan outlines how we preserve land, protect land, appreciate land, live on and near certain lands, prosper from that land, and connect our lands via transportation options. Landscapes 3 is a thoughtful approach to county planning that serves as a guidepost as we map out the next 10 years of development. Notably, Landscapes 3 distinguishes plans for our urban centers, suburban centers, rural areas, and agricultural areas. The planning principles it uses for rural areas like Big Elk Creek State Park include low-intensity institutional uses for land use patterns, protection of scenic view sheds, preservation of natural areas, including stream corridors, woodlands, steep slopes, and wetlands, roads that are conducive for cyclists but not widened to urban or suburban standards, and very limited public or community sewer and water services so as to discourage growth. Landscapes 3 defines rural landscapes as consisting of open and wooded lands with scattered villages, farms, and residential uses. Very limited development occurs there, preserving significant areas of open space and critical natural and cultural resources. Transportation infrastructure and amenities are context sensitive to the rural characteristics of rural areas. Big Elk Creek State Park, in its current form, fits within the bounds of Landscapes 3 appropriately. Its infrastructure and amenities fit within the context of the rural area around it, and the character of the land is not currently compromised. To fundamentally change Big Elk Creek State Park by building a massive campground complex and visitor center would inappropriately fall outside the rural context of this land, and it would compromise the strategic vision of Landscapes 3 for this part of Chester County. Chester County is the fastest growing county in Pennsylvania. As development spreads from nearby cities into the suburbs and exurbs, local residents who have lived in Chester County for decades are rightfully concerned about its rapidly changing character. Roads that were rarely used are hosting traffic jams for the first time. Neighborhoods and villages that were once sleepy communities are now getting crowded out by high-density housing. New schools are being built to accommodate the higher population density in many areas of Chester County. And while this seems to be happening all over most of Chester County, there's one notable exception: the area surrounding Big Elk Creek State Park. Big Elk Creek is a place where you can go to figuratively step back in time. It's one of the last remaining lands in Chester County that's not been corrupted by overdevelopment. The residents tend to prefer it that way. Here they can enjoy a quiet, peaceful existence without the trouble of traffic congestion, excessive noise, and litter. My fear is that any attempt to build a campground complex or visitor center would turn Big Elk Creek State Park into a tourist attraction and compromise the quality of place that local residents have enjoyed here for centuries. Members, please know that this is a truly special place. While I encourage people to visit Big Elk Creek State Park, I want it to be done intelligently and thoughtfully, with concern for local residents in mind. This park can be enjoyed without adding giant parking lots and campgrounds. I fear that there will be greater wear and tear on our local roads. I worry that litter will accumulate in places it's never accumulated before. I'm concerned that southern Chester County will lose its charm and character if we're not careful about the infrastructure we build here. I have a duty to my constituents to protect our greatest assets. I have a duty to ensure that they have quiet enjoyment of their properties. I have a duty to preserve the character, integrity of our lands. I have a duty to protect Big Elk Creek State Park. I hope my testimony here today has shown you that I take those duties seriously. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowe. Representative Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Senator Denneman, I just want to say in front of all these good people at Chester County, thank you so much for being here. You served in a time when Chester County was largely Republican and still got things done. I tell people all the time that they say, what's the secret to re-election in an area where I'm literally, quite literally, the last Republican standing in Delaware County and one of two in Chester County. I say it involves two elements, which I took largely from people that served like you: authenticity and take care of home, right? National politics set the world on fire right now. It creates a divide, and yet when you take care of home, you find friends on both sides of the aisle. And by and large, I want you to know that that's how your delegation in Chester County behaves with respect to one another, whether it's the county commissioners, your House delegation, or, for example, my relationship with John Kane in terms of getting things done. And I saw that in you. And I want you to know that John and I both saw that, and we're very grateful for your service and very, very grateful for you being here today. Commissioner Rowe, my comments and questions will be directed to you because I think you serve a portion of the county. You serve the whole county now, but where you're from looks a whole lot like mine or is headed that way. Part of the reason that I told you where I represent in my introduction is to make very clear for you, to make a mental image about where I live and what it looked like 30 years ago. Concord and Chadds Ford used to be horse country in Delaware County. Now it's Springfield, right? My district before reapportionment was from Upper Chichester, basically east and west along Baltimore Pike, stopping in Kennett Square, Kennett Township. Now, if you draw a bullseye that overlays Baltimore Pike, Route 1, and 202, Wilmington Pike, that is dead center in my district. I go east to west from about Chester Heights to Pennsbury, and then I go north-south from the Delaware border to Westtown. I want you to think about what that looks like. How many of you watched the show Yellowstone? That's a pretty good number. It's more in my community, but you're hardworking folks and don't watch TV. There was a scene late in one of the seasons where John Dutton, played by Kevin Costner, announces that he's going to run for governor of Montana. And he says, if progress is cutting down the mountains and paving it over and building airports and hotels, then I'm against progress. I'm the wall against which progress will bash its head. And that's kind of how I feel about my district. I am an absolute tenacious junkyard dog when it comes to preserving open space. So much so that the Board of Commissioners joined with us in terms of getting funding from the county, funding from private agencies or organizations, and from the state to save Craybilly Farm. If you don't know where Craybilly Farm is, it's right on. And listen, I don't want to take credit for that. That was a voter referendum in Westtown predominantly that came about while I was getting elected to represent Westtown. But nevertheless, that was a critical, essential piece of my campaign platform is I'm done building in Delaware and Chester County. I'm done with it. And as I said to the director when he was up here, I'm originally from Alaska. I moved here for the love of a beautiful woman. And I bring that culture with me, right? I bring a culture of wanting my children to have places to grow up that aren't sitting on 202 in traffic. That's the bane of my legislative existence is roads. So, to my question, Commissioner, I asked this of the director and he wouldn't answer it. Are you aware of any elected official, be it the General Assembly, in the executive branch, or in county government, that has asked for us to develop Big Elk Creek State Park into a state park?
No.
And have you had those conversations in county government?
No.
Okay. So as far as you know, and I'm asking leading questions. I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Have you solicited the input from the other two Democrat members of the Board of Commissioners?
I can't speak on their behalf. What I can say is the county commissioners appointed 2 members to a task force that is, the stated intent of the task force is to steer DCNR in the right direction when it comes to Big Elk Creek State Park. We appointed 2 members to that task force. We voted for them unanimously, and those 2 members share our concerns with proposed RV parks and overnight accommodations in the park.
I would suggest to you, thank you for that response, and I take it for what it's worth, meaning that I absolutely believe in and give true value to that. I'm going to make an ask of you publicly. It's time for a binary choice. Not advisors and representatives on the board. It's time for a binary choice at the Board of Commissioners. Put a resolution to them and make them vote yes or no. Are they in favor of development of this end of southern Chester County where we've worked extraordinarily hard? Bear in mind, I got almost the entirety of the Brandywine battlefield in my district. And every time I tour a historic home or historic property, I say, make an argument that ties you to our history. When children come and visit me in the House of Representatives, I show them in all the murals that are in the house where you served, all of the pieces of our history that tie back to Chester County. With General Wayne up there in the large mural behind the speaker, with the Valley Forge in the back of the chamber. I mean, there's so much of our southeastern history is right there on the House floor. And the Battle of the Brandywine was its first instance, the first shots fired in defense of our independence. I'm going to close with this, and then we'll get to the next panel and any other people that have questions. I find it completely insincere that nobody knows who wants this. Somebody knows. That's why I want to know from the 2 other commissioners in Chester County, are they in support of this? I haven't seen any other state representative or state senator in the current General Assembly from Chester County saying I'm a forceful advocate for mowing down part of the forest in southern Chester County. I haven't heard the governor from Montgomery County say that he's in favor of this. I think, as the senator said, this is bureaucracy run amok. And the good news for us, Senator, is the United States Supreme Court said about 2 weeks ago that 50 years or so of jurisprudence that gave deference to the agency state is over. It is over. Their director of state parks is not an official who's been elected by us. He does not represent my views. I put him to a cross-examination about documents that he gave to the federal government representing what he intended to do with our county. Didn't recall the document, admitted that maybe that's what was written. I asked him whose idea was it that we changed the purpose of this land, and he wouldn't answer the question, right? I'm a long-time prosecutor. I get to turn to the jury at the end and I say, you saw I asked these questions 18 times and he wouldn't answer the question. Did he answer the question? No, he did not. So my next question when I get back to Harrisburg will be to the governor's staff, which is to say, do you support cutting our forest down? Do you support putting sewage treatment and water treatment plants in southern Chester County where we have a culture that goes back to William Penn? And I'm guessing the answer is going to be no, and he's going to say this would be the fourth branch of government, the administrative state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank each of you for coming to testify today and for lending your voice, each of which I think is very important. You know, especially the township supervisors, you're the boots on the grounds, right? We dither in Harrisburg all the time on every issue you can imagine, right? Kicking the can down the road. We could talk about it for a long time. And you guys don't have that luxury, right? When somebody walks in the door and files a permit, you've got to take notice. So I appreciate your service, and I appreciate you being here today. Senator, I appreciate you being here. I recall a couple of years ago when the head of the White Clay Creek Preserve Friends Group, which is a fantastic organization, came to see me, and I know they came to see you as well. And they were begging might not be the right word, but for money to fix the leaking roof at the White Clay Creek Preserve headquarters. Do you recall that? And do you remember how hard it was to get a couple lousy bucks together to fix the leaking roof there?
Yes, I do. And one of the things is DCNR.
Can you make sure your microphone is on?
I'm sorry. One of the matters is DCNR, which will be making all kinds of promises to you now on this park. I suggest you get it in writing and have a good lawyer look it over, because what happened was there was not only a leaking roof, but there was an historic building there whose walls were falling down. We asked DCNR for money. I finally got money with the help of Representative Lawrence through some Senate funds to fix it. And you know, we kept asking the Secretary of DCNR, Cindy Dunn, to come down to look at what was going on. You know, White Clay Creek was one of the earliest Baptist communities. The Baptists came up from Delaware into Chester County as part of the many groups that came here. Cindy Dunn, despite repeated requests, never would come. Then all of a sudden in 2022, she shows up to say we're having a state park. So the question I think that Representative Lawrence is asking is, what guarantee are you going to have that they're going to take care of this place well? And will this all fall again on the citizens and the townships? Because I can tell you that they would only put a half-time ranger there at White Clay Creek. So I think what you have is an example, don't you, of DCNR's lack of taking care of something, and you certainly don't want that to happen. And as John has pointed out, and I'm sure I do think, Representative Lawrence, that you do too remember the commitments that were made to us and made quite clearly that this was to be an addition to the preserve, and all of a sudden in 2022 this amazingly changed.
I think about that John Evans house, which is down the street there from the headquarters building, which is probably one of the most historic, frankly, buildings in this neck of the woods.
Absolutely.
That, unfortunately, is one step away from falling over.
Correct.
A good breeze at this point would. At this point, it's a shame that really there's nothing left, frankly, for it to be done there except maybe to knock it down. I don't know. That was not the case 10 years ago. There was an opportunity to preserve and restore that building, which is remarkable, historic, and I mean, at this point, DCNR says they're going to dedicate some funds to it. Right now, there's a chain link fence around it. We don't have time to talk about that today. Supervisor Walters, thank you for your service to the people of Elk Township, generational service. You wear many hats. You're not just a supervisor. You're the roadmaster. You're running an entire township on $430,000 a year. Could you? I'd like you to come to Harrisburg, please, and get our budget straightened out. You mentioned that a quarter of the $430,000 is for fire and EMS services.
That's correct.
And that the contributions you're putting forward to Medic 94 Union and the fire companies in this neck of the woods are about a quarter of that. Mm-hmm. And that's based off of how many calls come out of Elk Township every year for services, and that makes sense.
Among other things, population and some other things. Right.
So my question is that, also roadmaster, mm-hmm. right? There's a cost associated certainly with upkeep of roads in Elk Township roads. Has DCNR offered to provide any financial support to Elk Township to cover the additional costs that the township is going to have to outlay down the road, depending on how things play out here?
We've had none of those conversations.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We haven't had any of those conversations.
Chairman Gerstenhaber, from Franklin perspective, have there been any conversations along those lines?
There have not.
So I think that's an issue, and I can tell you just candidly, right? And look, I'm not here to demonize DCNR, but I am here to tell the truth. And in speaking with some of our colleagues from other parts of the state, where there's very large state forest lands, state park lands, very rural area. I'm talking about the northern tier. What they've said to me is DCNR just bulldozes right over, right? They don't care. South Nowheresville Township, right? And it's a big problem up there because services have to be provided and somebody's got to pay for it. And when half the township is a state forest and they're not putting in what they should be putting in, that's a problem. So as I look at this coming attractions down the pike here, I also think about the fact that several $1 million worth of properties came off the tax rolls from a property tax perspective when this property went from private ownership into the state. That's correct. Am I not right? I would be, and I'm not going to ask you off the top of your head. If you know, that'd be great. But I would like you to get to the chairman of the committee the revenue loss that the townships have seen from the decrease in property taxes that are no longer being paid on that property. And so what I'm seeing here is that the townships are getting less revenue and being asked to put out more because of this project. That's the reality. Could you get that to the chairman of the committee down the road here? Thank you. The last thing I'll say is this, because we just got a notice that we're going to be in session in 2 hours. So, and we have another panel, so I want to hear what they have to say. But just very briefly to Supervisor Gerstenhaber. So the Franklin Township, I hesitate to say municipal complex because it's not a complex, right? It's great is what it is. But at any rate, you're kind of behind the post office there and everything. The township has a little bit of ground there, and I think there's some talk about renovating some things a little bit. DCNR has discussed the need for maintenance facility to house lawnmowers, chainsaws, weed whacks, things to maintain trails, this kind of thing. If DCNR were to approach the township and say, hey, could we rent a building? Could we rent space here, which is kind of close by, but rather than build some, big new building down at the park, a mile away, which, by the way, the existing visitor center for White Clay Creek Preserve is 5 miles away. That's something we haven't had a chance to talk about today, about the fact that that's very rare in the state that we would see 2 visitor centers 5 miles away from each other, but we don't have time to get into that today. My question to you, Supervisor Gerstenhaber, is would the township be willing to entertain a conversation if there was an appetite from DCNR to utilize existing facilities or maybe slightly expand those facilities either to rent or to build a building there? Would there be an appetite from the township along those lines?
So I can't speak for the rest of the board. I'm one of 5. But, the way I think we see DCNR is we're neighbors. We are interested in that same piece of property. And so any creative ideas that we can work together to make the relationship better is one that we would absolutely have a conversation about, for sure.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you to the testifiers, our local community leaders. I really appreciate you being here. And we're going to move to the next panel here.
John, thank you. I'm on the way. Good.
Thank you. That's fine, yeah.
Thank you for your nice comment.
Gary, are you here?
We'll be sure to add him if he shows up. So again, as Representative Lawrence pointed out, we do have to be on the House floor in about 2 hours. So we're making sure we're going to get through all the testimony, but we want to make sure that you get your time. But again, if you keep testimony to 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll take a few questions. So with us here, this is the community leaders panel of folks that are advocates for our recreation in this area. We have Antia Consorto and George Hunt here with us. Antia is with the Save Big Elk Creek, and George Hunt is with the Executive Director of Safety, Agriculture, Villages, and Environment. And we also have Gary Schroeder, who is the founder of the Friends of White Clay Creek Preserve. Antia, if you want to kick us off, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Antia Consorto, and I've been a resident of Franklin Township for 37 years. My family home backs up to what is now Big Elk Creek State Park. This area is known for its bucolic nature and for the peace and quiet one can find, which is why so many of us stay here. Being able to quietly commune with nature and to be away from development and the noise of vehicles is a rare thing these days. This truly unique piece of land has given us that chance for longer than I've been around, as a responsibly farmed and maintained property supporting 15 rare and endangered plant species. Local residents and other supporters of open space and conservation were thrilled when the land was acquired as part of the White Clay Creek Preserve, but now feel betrayed by DCNR. DCNR's actions have caused a lot of mistrust and deep concern for this beautiful, critical wildlife corridor we share with a wide variety of flora and fauna. The Natural Heritage Program within DCNR has identified almost all of the property and surrounding area as core and supportive habitat. The report issued by this program states, and I quote, "Avoid building additional houses or infrastructure within the natural heritage area in order to prevent fragmentation of the habitat and loss of species of concern." I'm not sure how we go from a report like that to building a visitor center, comfort stations, and a maintenance garage at the least, up to the potential for a campground that would have been over 100 acres of developed land, the size of 4 Citizen Bank parks, even though it's off the table for now. White Clay Creek Preserve is located 5 miles away from Big Elk Creek and already has comfort stations, an office, visitor center, and meeting house. DCNR has more than $1 billion backlog of work needed across the state. Why are they intent on building more infrastructure when they cannot afford to take care of what they already have? Through research, I found that this property is also being used as a mitigation for land in northern Pennsylvania that has been purchased with federal land and water conservation funds and then leased out to natural gas companies. The Strawbridge property also gives them a bank to use for any future mitigation needs. DCNR's environmental assessment of the property submitted in 2019 for mitigation purposes states no development is proposed for the replacement property, and that they are exempt from conducting a noise analysis given that it does not involve development of the replacement property or construction of any infrastructure. LWCF conversions will not cause activities or development that will increase noise levels. Since taking over the property, I've personally witnessed widespread haphazard application of glyphosate, better known as Roundup, and extensive spread of invasives such as poison hemlock due to a delayed mowing schedule requiring the application of more herbicides. The conversion of cropland to pollinator meadows with widespread herbicide use has caused local wildlife to seek new food sources, driving them into neighboring developments to find food. Creating a pollinator meadow and reforesting open fields is changing animal habitat without regard to the previously balanced ecosystem. The regular application of herbicides has been deemed necessary to protect the 74,000 trees recently planted to not only fix the riparian buffer, but to forest a significant portion of our open meadowland and cropland. I'm not sure how applying glyphosate is helpful to our pollinators considering the damage it is proven to cause. What happened to the idea of controlled burns and a proper mowing schedule to keep invasives down and to promote better health of the land? After an amazing turnout at the January town hall where DCNR and government officials heard a huge public outcry to protect this land, DCNR agreed to engage with an advisory committee of local residents to work on plans for Big Elk Creek. This turned into DCNR taking control, ignoring many of the requests of the townships, and forming a task force to their specifications. While stakeholders were allowed to select their representatives, none of the other decisions were made with consideration to stakeholder requests. As a member of this task force, I must admit that the armed rangers at the door to the meetings came across as an intimidation tactic on the part of DCNR. The supporting staff DCNR brings to each meeting generally meets or exceeds the number of task force members. It has been a battle to get these meetings to actually facilitate helpful discussion, and the feeling is that DCNR has preconceived decisions they pose as giving us a choice. The questions and discussion is more of, here's the visitor center, where do you think it should go? Not asking if the task force feels it needs to exist at all. Additionally, during the course of these meetings, it's been revealed that DCNR has already hired staff before having a plan for the property and now needs infrastructure to support the hiring decisions. These actions and others further demonstrate to the community that their current mode of operation is to put the proverbial cart before the horse. DCNR has promoted a huge lack of trust in the community with the lack of transparency, predetermined outcomes, aggressive stances, and no true desire to engage with the community or township officials. We are in an agriculturally based community with deep ties and respect for the land around us. There are many highly educated and knowledgeable residents that DCNR has seemingly ignored in favor of advice that furthers their agenda. The lack of communication and their comprehensive cookie-cutter planning by individuals who have never stepped foot on the property, let alone live anywhere nearby, has led us to where we are today. A large local community going into battle like David and Goliath to protect a unique and rare gem, fighting to preserve the critical natural resource that is Big Elk Creek. Thank you.
Mr. Schroeder?
Good morning, and thank you for putting this hearing together, John. My name is Gary Schrader, live in London Britton Township. I've been deeply engaged in our community for 45 years. I'm an original member of the White Clay Creek Preserve Bi-State Advisory Council, and as was noted earlier, I founded the Friends of the White Clay Creek Preserve. The Friends group has been very active in bringing that to the state we see it today. At the public meeting in January, we proposed an advisory task force to work with PA State Parks to plan an appropriate future for the Big Elk State Park. So I want to thank the elected officials, community, and also PA State Parks and DCNR leadership who support enabling that partnership to begin. We're not all on the same page, but at least we're talking to each other. The task force is going to be meeting, and I look forward to seeing its progress. It was a similar partnership that made the White Clay Creek Preserve the major success it is today, and I believe we will enjoy the same success with Big Elk. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a park that embraces the unique, large, undeveloped space available on the property. In other parts of Pennsylvania, there are hundreds of thousands of acres of undeveloped forest. Yet here, in the high-density populated mid-Atlantic area, this nearly 2,000-acre undeveloped area of the Big Elk is a treasure to be embraced and protected. The forests in other parts of the state are mostly found on non-tillable land, such as mountains and steep slopes. We have the opportunity here to regrow forests on rich soil that will produce amazing forest and meadow ecosystems. It will take active management to keep invasive species at bay, but I think we know how to do that. A white oak tree can take over 200 years to reach its full size. We need to have a similar long-term timeline of commitment by the community and the state to reach its potential. So I'm very concerned when I hear statements like, we're not going to do a campground for now. I think we need to end the for now part of that. None of us in this room may live to see these 200-year-old trees, but we have an obligation to plant them for future generations. We often describe the Big Elk by its tangible physical attributes and resources. the free-flowing creek, unique plants, mature timber, meadows, the open space. These are important assets to be protected. But I believe the greatest asset of the Big Elk State Park is its intangible assets. A peace and quiet away from human noise that allows one to hear the sounds of nature that are often drowned out. The soft sounds of tropical birds feeding the young, the whisper of an afternoon breeze through the leaves, and the noisy call of a red-shouldered hawk young screaming to be fed. These are rare resources that need to be embraced. The Big Elk is a very unique wildlife habitat. It is, frankly, a very unique resource in southeastern Pennsylvania. 3 weeks ago, on 2 consecutive days, I was hiking in the Big Elk. It was Monday and Tuesday, 3 weeks ago. And I had 4 such intangible, phenomenal wildlife experiences, and I want to share them to create context for why we're making the requests that we're making. Hiking along the creek early one morning, heard a loud splash less than 20 feet away. Walking the edge of the stream, I had an osprey fly up almost in my face with its breakfast, a nice 8-inch trout. That's an incredible experience. In the same area where the male turkeys had been heard gobbling just a few months before, I walked around the edge of a field and was startled by a dozen small turkeys and their mother flying in every direction. I thought one was going to land on my head. I got to watch 2 full-grown bald eagles flying away from their nest, and I could hear a young eagle calling for its attention. And then, hiking along a different part of the park the following morning, I heard a scurrying beside me. I assumed it was a squirrel, but instead there was a solid black Native American mink. It was less than 15 feet away, and unexpectedly ran back and forth in front of me. We stood motionlessly watching, and we realized there were 2 baby minks about 15 feet away. Clearly the mother was trying to get them to move to safety. Instead, the 2 babies were curious and nosed up within 6 feet of us. Cutest thing you ever saw. Then the mother grabbed one by the scruff of the neck and carried it out of sight, and the other one, like an insolent teenager, eventually followed along. I've spent a lifetime hiking and backpacking all over the world. Seldom do people experience this variety of unique wildlife in one place, let alone in one of the most densely populated regions of the country. This ecosystem is a rare resource that needs protected and expanded. At the meeting in January, I issued a challenge, a proposal, and John Hollis, I mentioned you, and Cindy Dunn by name, and others as well. I have another challenge tonight for you and Cindy, and I included John and Jason on that last time. We were all shocked and stunned when the Big Elk was declared a state park, and we've heard discussions about the nature of it, where it came from. My challenge to you is to take the high road, seize the opportunity here. I think you can make an incredible statement by using the same resources with a new governor and declaring the Big Elk a preserve. I think that best serves the resources, I think it best serves community, and I think it best serves our future generations. Thank you.
I'm George Hunt, Executive Director of SAVE, or Safety, Agriculture, Villages, and Environment. SAVE is a 501c3 nonprofit which has advocated for smart growth, sound infrastructure, and open space in southern Chester County for over 25 years. Thank you to our hosts and members of this committee for the opportunity to testify in favor of keeping the lands of Big Elk Creek as a preserve open to the public for passive recreation. Many of you in attendance here this morning were also present at the town hall hosted by Franklin and Elk Townships in January, when supporters who enjoy access to this natural treasure gave personal, impassioned accounts for sustaining these lands as they are and not encumbered with extensive infrastructure. We support this view. Over several years, a well-respected conservationist, George Strawbridge Jr., transferred lands in Elk, Franklin, and New London Townships to Pennsylvania DCNR. He did so with the understanding that they would remain unchanged without development. Furthermore, every public characterization, including of these transfers, including the Big Elk Creek property in question, was that the lands would continue to be preserved, similar to or as an extension of the White Clay Creek Preserve in London Britton Township. SAVE is concerned that DCNR is directing a current master plan for Big Elk Creek State Park, which will violate the seller's intent of the land transfer. This could discourage well-meaning benefactors of large parcels in the future, as well as funding sources. Furthermore, these lands not only possess unique ecological and geological characteristics, but in combination with their neighbors should remain a preserve with the many attributes and services to wilderness which will benefit Commonwealth residents. Targeting the open lands of Big Elk Creek as an appropriate location to develop on-site administrative and educational facilities will diminish their contribution to the open space and passive recreation of the larger whole. Replacing natural areas with built infrastructure and considerable hardscape will reduce the public value of these lands, which have heretofore been preserved for generations. Creating new facilities, conveniences, and accommodations is excessive and will bring the activities of man to the very forefront of the Big Elk Creek. SAVE commends DCNR for attending both the July Town Hall and today's hearing. We are grateful for its many efforts to protect the natural resources of southern Chester County and throughout the Commonwealth. However, there have been and continue to be lapses in transparency. Correspondence now in the public sphere indicates that DCNR had been planning for RV campgrounds and other new infrastructure months before the public announcement of a state park designation. Adding insult to injury, the consensus from DCNR's own stakeholder meetings a year ago last July was mischaracterized. Public survey results were also manipulated to overstate the appeal of campgrounds, etc. At the January Town Hall, DCNR did agree to participate in an advisory task force for the White Clay Creek Preserve and Big Elk Creek State Park's master plan. This is a positive step. Membership in this task force is being concealed, however. While transcripts from 2 meetings have eventually been made public, there needs to be clearer communication with the public about how the master plan is being drafted. Officials and residents of Elk and Franklin Township have not been sufficiently included in the master planning process. Surely, after stewarding these lands for so many years, these elected officials understand best the negative externalities which would impact their area. These include safety, traffic, road maintenance, emergency services, etc. DCNR appears to maintain that any of its development plans are not subject to local land use approval. The municipal land use process should be respected. In conclusion, we encourage DCNR to work with Elk and Franklin Township officials to determine a less impactful way for various proposed facilities. Also, DCNR should adopt a joint master plan with the White Clay Creek Preserve and Big Elk Creek properties. The advisory task force apparently has this under consideration. It is our hope that DCNR will work openly with the many stakeholders involved to create an efficient and sustainable plan. And lastly, I want to return to the January Town Hall to paraphrase one of the many supporters of Big Elk, its lands, flora, and fauna. Who will speak for the hummingbirds? Thank you.
Thank you guys for your testimony and the personal anecdotes as well. I think it really shines a light on it as well. Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I say anything else, I do want to apologize again. We had scheduled this hearing prior to this day being announced as a session day. And I want to thank those in the audience who have stuck around for 2.5 hours. So I appreciate your dedication as well. And I appreciate each of you coming to testify today as well and your leadership. Gary, I greatly respect and admire you. I think there's no way to really to overstate the impact of your dedicated service to the community for the last 45 years. You've left a legacy that many folks who have never met you and never will meet you will enjoy for generations. And I appreciate your call today with regard to designating the property as a preserve going forward very much. So I mentioned earlier about the White Clay Creek State Park in Delaware. So Delaware just completed a new master plan for the White Clay Creek State Park. And they surveyed park visitors. There's 300,000, according to the data that I saw. 300,000 people visit on the Delaware side every year. They surveyed park visitors on what they wanted to see changed going forward. The number one answer was nothing. The number 3 answer was no more pavement. The answers 2, 4, and 5 dealt with more options for walking and biking trails. So I think this highlights that folks using these areas, these contiguous areas, are not looking for some sort of man-created attraction. The attraction is nature itself. Auntie, I appreciate all the good work that you have done very much. You've been a leader in this effort. A question I would have for you, as you've heard from people on this issue, has it been just folks in this neck of the woods? Has it been just folks from Franklin Township? Or have you heard from folks far and wide? I'm curious, maybe for the record more than anything else, about who you've heard from on this issue.
I've heard from people all over the state of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland. We've had people as far as Virginia and Maine contact with this issue. Our petition had signatures from 48 of the 50 states. So it's not just an issue that's local. There are a lot of people, regionally and nationally that are interested in following along.
So particularly as we, as we bring the hearing to a close here, Mr. Chairman, as we look forward going down the road here, this is an issue that's going to be in the public for quite some time. And the decisions, as I mentioned earlier, the decisions that are made in the next 12 months are going to impact this area for the next 100 years, forever, really. And it's really, I cannot overstate the importance of not just the folks who've showed up today and the folks who have testified, but the importance of being active as we communicate with DCNR what we want to see happen at this facility going forward. Mr. Hunt, I want to give you an opportunity just to comment a little bit. You made some comments, and I appreciate your testimony very much about some of the things that you've seen and, some of the things you appreciate that DCNR have done over the last little bit here and some of the challenges that you've seen. What are some suggestions you might make to DCNR as we move forward?
First off, thank you, Representative Lawrence, for being such a strong voice in this matter, and thank you very much for that. I'm not a member of the task force, Antea is, but as my conclusion indicates, I think there has to be continued and more cooperation between the various entities involved, and that DCNR should work on a joint master plan so that we don't have this fragmented approach where, as Senator Dinniman said, you end up having the bureaucracy making decisions, controlling things without accountability. So I think there's a reason why townships have comprehensive plans, counties do, and so on. I think there should be an explicit plan, whose process is in the formation of which is communicated to all of you, and so that you can have a voice in it, and that it can be referred to going down the road.
Thank you. Gary, Auntie, I'd like to put that question to you too, just as we come to a close here. Are there any final remarks you'd like to make with regard to suggestions as we move forward?
Well, I shared my thought already, and request and challenge that we have the courage to recognize the uniqueness of this property and reverse the declaration of a park. I think the high road here is to make it a preserve. I think the key to that for us as a community is that we stay highly engaged and that we stay with it. We keep talking about the white clay as our standard, and that is, I think, excellent, and I think we need to model ourselves off of that. The key to the white clay was we, as a bi-state advisory council, and I was one of the founding members of that, our charter members, we literally met on a regular basis for 20 years. So this wasn't a task force for a year and then go away. We all stayed engaged, and because of that, I think that's why this community has expressed and demonstrated this deep ownership that we have of the property, because it is ours and we do it. When trees fall down, there's a crew of us that clean up the trails and make it work. We've been doing it for 40 years, and we're going to keep doing it. I'm not sure if I'm going to last another 40 or not, but we're going to keep doing it. And I think that deep engagement with the community, which is very different from how most parks operate, because it is just run by management. I think if we can do that, then we will have the future that we've all envisioned in this hearing today.
I would echo what Gary has said about returning it to the preserve status that it belongs in, as well as, rather than putting the money into more infrastructure for Big Elk Creek, move that money into improving the infrastructure that already exists at White Clay and improving the visitor experience there. There's a lot of work that could be done, and that money could make a huge difference in getting that work accomplished.
Thank you very much, and thank you each for being here today. And I sincerely appreciate all of your hard work on this, and I appreciate everyone who attended this hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next. So I want to thank the panel for being here. Thanks for your leadership on this issue. And again, I really want to thank Representative Lawrence for bringing us out here. I will tell you, it's no small feat to the fact that members showed up here on a session day because we care about these issues. Local issues are important, and if there's anything that I've learned today is that transparency and communication are key in making these decisions. And I think there's some work to be done there, and I think that's what this policy committee highlights. So although this may be a local issue for you folks, it has an impact across the state because transparency, accountability, and communication with state agencies is dire and extremely important. And I want to thank Representative Lawrence for having us here, bringing this issue to our attention, and hopefully making a difference here based upon the testimony to keep Big Elk the way that you folks intended to stay. And with that, we have our next policy hearing is tomorrow, actually in my district, surprisingly, on the costs of benefits of doing business in Pennsylvania. And that hearing will be tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Shippensburg. I will now gavel out and adjourn this meeting.